Hello and welcome to the eOrganic webinar on the NRCS EQIP Organic Initiative and Organic Dairy Farms with speakers Sarah Brown and Kevin Kaya. My name is Deb Haliba and I work at the University of Vermont Extension as eOrganic's Dairy Team Coordinator. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with e-extension. You can find all of our published articles, videos, and upcoming and recorded webinars on our website at eextension.org/organic_production. Okay, it's my pleasure to now introduce our speakers for today. Sarah Brown is an organic conservation specialist for USDA NRCS as a joint position with Oregon Tilth. Through this national position, she develops trainings and technical information for use by NRCS staff and other ag service providers to better support conservation work on organic farms. Kevin Kaya, who is sitting right here beside me, is an agronomist and grazing specialist with USDA NRCS in Vermont. He has been working with livestock farmers to set up and improve their grazing systems for more than 20 years now here in Vermont. So Sarah and Kevin, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll pass the mic over to Sarah.
Great, thank you, Deb, and I'm happy to be here today and have the opportunity to chat with everyone. So I was asked to join here just to give kind of an overview of what practices and programs are available to organic dairy farmers from NRCS. And I've been working with NRCS for the past 3 years to help them better integrate organic programs and services into their kind of structure and agency. And I've had the opportunity to talk to planners all over the country and producers as well to hear about what's worked and what hasn't. So with that background, we're hoping to kind of give a brief overview of what NRCS has to offer and talk specifically about the organic initiative, and then just briefly cover what the sign-up process looks like for producers. And then Kevin will go through some of the conservation practices that might be more attractive for organic dairy operations, giving some examples. And then we'll just give a brief overview of some of the resources that are available and some tips on navigating NRCS websites when you're looking for information, since sometimes that can be a little tricky. So just for those of you who aren't familiar, the Natural Resource Conservation Service is an agency within the USDA, and one of my favorite resources that they have available is actually the soil survey. So there's a little kind of screenshot right here of what that looks like. You could look up the soils on your farm and learn all sorts of great characteristics about them. That was really helpful for us, for my husband and I, when we were looking for a farm to know what soils the different properties had. There's technical assistance programs, of which NRCS EQIP provides technical assistance, but it itself is actually considered a farm bill program. There's emergency assistance. I know that for floods there's been quite a bit, and drought NRCS has done quite a bit of work. There's conservation partnership efforts with organizations like Tilth and others, and there's just quite a number of resources on agronomic techniques. Right now there's a huge soil health initiative to get producers using cover crops more and building soil biology. So additionally, this year we just finalized our webinar series. So that covers a number of different organic and sustainable ag topics, and we have guest speakers for that, and that's available to the public as well. So today we wanted to specifically talk about EQIP since it seemed most relevant, and it's one of the more popular programs that NRCS offers. And it's kind of a complicated name, but it's a pretty straightforward program. So it provides technical and financial assistance to help plan and implement conservation practices that address natural resource concerns. And those can be associated with soil, water, plants, animals, air, energy even, and on ag lands and non-industrial private forest land. And so I think the real key here that I want to emphasize is that NRCS is not in the business of doing grants. So what I sometimes hear from planners in the field is that farmers come in and say, I'd like to sign up for a grant, I want a high tunnel, or I want a grant to do cover cropping. And really, that's not really the best approach to take, because as an agency, NRCS really prides itself on working on conservation issues. So if you can take a step back and think about what those issues are on your farm, and really come to NRCS with those issues, they can work with you to identify what practices or programs might work best in your situation. So just some program logistics. The Organic Initiative, so there's a regular EQIP program, and then there's a special pool of funding that's been set aside that's been labeled the Organic Initiative. And that's eligible producers include certified organic, transitioning, and exempt producers. So it's open to kind of a broader category than just certified. And to be eligible, you need to submit your organic certificate or sign a self-certification form saying that you're in the transition or you're exempt from certification. So NRCS is not in the business of doing certification or doing inspections or audits about what organic is and whether you're following the standards. They just need to have proof from you that you fall into one of these categories. So one of the major challenges with the Organic Initiative has been the producer payment limits, and currently that's $20,000 annually or $80,000 over the life of the entire contract. And unfortunately, these limits have been set by the Farm Bill, and so I know there's a lot of organic advocates at work trying to remove them. And just to give you some perspective, under regular EQIP, the limits are hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I know for dairy operations, some of the practices that Kevin will get into, they can end up being pretty costly and pretty extensive. And so these limits can actually be quite a challenge. So if and when that is the case for you, you might consider the regular EQIP program instead. But the benefit of the Organic Initiative is that it's much less competitive, and the funding has yet to be fully utilized nationally, and you're only competing against other organic operations. So where you might not get funded through regular EQIP, there's a very good chance you'll get funded through the Organic Initiative. Although if the work you want to do is extensive and expensive, EQIP might be the better way to go. So didn't want to mention that. Also, the ranking deadlines. So while you can sign up year-round for the program, there are ranking deadlines set annually, at which point the current applicants are ranked and you can begin work. So those dates actually are occurring now. They do vary by state, so I believe there's 7 or 8 dates that are set nationally, and states can choose which ones they'd like to utilize. So often states might pick more than one, so you have a couple opportunities to get your application in before a ranking date, but they are happening now and over the next couple of months. So if it's something you're interested in, it would be smart to start pursuing it now. So I think one of the main barriers for folks, or perceived barriers, is often that because it's with the federal government, you're going to be doing paperwork forever. And as organic producers, you're very familiar with taking records and wading through organic system plans, and so you might not be too interested in signing up for what appears to be more work. And I can actually say from my own experience that while there are contracts and paperwork to go through, it was not nearly as bad as I had expected, and it was certainly worth my time based on the financial assistance we received. So I'd encourage you to still go for it. So the steps are, you obviously contact NRCS and they'll help you develop a conservation plan. Two of the main components are going to be identifying the resource concerns on your operation and identifying what conservation practices might be used to address them. And Kevin will go into that in much more detail here in just a second. Additionally, you're going to also need to work with FSA, which is a Farm Service Agency, and more often than not, they're housed in the same building as your NRCS office. And what they'll do is they'll identify your farm number and get you signed up and eligible to participate in Farm Bill programs. So that, again, it takes a little bit, but it won't take too long. But if you are interested in signing up this year, it's probably good to get started on that process sooner than later. So some of the other steps in the process when you go in, NRCS will take your application. They'll determine your land eligibility. So using the information from FSA, they'll look up your land. There might be if it's a wetland, or if there's wetland on the property, or if it's considered highly erodible land, there are some things they'll want to look into. They'll also ask for your irrigation history, and the reason for that is that there can be assistance with irrigation, but it's dependent on how you've used irrigation in the past. So they're not going to help you install a new irrigation system on land you've never irrigated before, but they will potentially help you if you are developing or interested in developing a more water conserving irrigation system. So then it's developing a conservation plan, what practices you're interested in, and then your application is screened and ranked. And the next step is developing conservation plan specifications, which are now sometimes being called implementation requirements. And those are really, I kind of think of them as the recipe for how the practices will be implemented on your farm. So Kevin will give you a little bit more details there.
Hello, folks. Thank you. Most NRCS folks know developing a conservation plan involves a 9-step planning process, and what that involves is first identifying the problem. And for instance, one of the problems may be a complaint that there's odor in an urban type setting, or there may be water tests that came back from a well and they want to identify those. So once you've identified the problem, you work very closely with your landowner, farmer, tenant, or whatever. And the whole key to this is communication. So for instance, in this picture, one might eventually kneel down and look up to this person as being the person who knows the most about the land. And that's really key in the planning process. Then you would determine objectives. The objective for water quality would be to improve water quality, both surface and perhaps subsurface. You would move on to inventorying resources, and this involves all resources. Wildlife, archaeological resources are important, and you can do a lot of this inventory in the office, or you can do it by making footsteps, which is the most important. Old maps, old historical data are very good. For instance, there's a map system in the east here called the Beers maps, and they will identify old cellar holes. Those are archaeological sites. The stone walls are considered archaeological sites. Oftentimes we put fences along those. So we integrate all resources into the conservation planning process. Then, working with the landowner, we formulate alternatives, and we evaluate those alternatives. The alternatives we offer should be discussed thoroughly, and the final decision will be the landowner's. Now, we need to bring in economics at some point. Which one is more valuable in the long run? Which ones will cost? What are the operating expenses of these? So a good plan involves more than just looking at putting something on the ground. It's the eventual operation and maintenance that is going to be involved as well. And the last three steps that some of us are familiar with is we make the decisions, and this involves signing contracts, making agreements, and then we implement the plan. When the plan is implemented, there is a lifespan for this, and it's very important that the planner or the conservationist goes to great extent to come back and communicate how things are going. Is it working or is it not? And that helps us or the conservationists understand what may need to be changed in a conservation practice. And this moves into evaluating the plan. Did we make a good plan? And can we improve it the next time around? So there are 9 steps to that. Thank you. Okay, what are the resource concerns? And fairly quickly, we use an acronym called SWAPA, or we have used, and we, in years past, added an H, and this is extremely important, I think, as I mentioned before, and that comes into the whole economic scene. What is going to be the effect of developing a huge contract, or even a small contract in some regard, and bringing this dollar resource into the picture? So you also want to use the human factor in terms of getting partners like the extension services throughout the country and Oregon Tilth or conservation districts, so that you may be able to leverage other activities. Soil, the condition, erosion, the water quantity, is there excess water, flooding, the quality, the groundwater contaminants that may be there, the surface water contaminants from runoff, air is the A in SWAPA, and at times in the suburban or urban setting we have odors. Would it be better to transition to a composting system rather than the liquid manure system? The P is for plants, and we look at productivity, the adaptability of those plants. Are there invasive species? Is the health and vigor there? And of course these are all interconnected because the plants are interconnected with the soil. And the A is for animals. Many organic farms are also concerned with humane treatment of animals. So the facility itself needs to be up to a certain standard to make that National Organic Program standard work in terms of outdoor access and cold temperatures in the north and so forth. I think we should move on. Yeah. Okay, what are NRCS conservation practices? Conservation practices are designed to address a specific resource concern. They are put on the ground to help the landscape heal or become a better landscape for the farmer, both economically and resource ecologically. We could put a number of buzzwords in there: sustainability, what was the other one? Resiliency. All this needs to be considered in a multifunctional approach to putting all these conservation practices together so one can complement the other. Now in this slide you see the compost. That will eventually be part of the nutrient management plan. The grazing system is going to increase soil quality. That will be part of the whole goal of making a good conservation plan. bee pollinators habitat put in the right place at the right time. If this is an integrated farm with vegetable crops, that's a good practice. And in the lower part we have perhaps a sheep farm which may want to address parasite control or something like that. Thank you. Okay, prescribed grazing, the word prescribed in some instances makes people a little uncomfortable, and even rotational grazing is terminology that may be somewhat archaic. We may move to rational grazing rather than rotational, and a lot of people are using holistic grazing. To think that a conservation plan or a grazing plan in particular with a bunch of columns and data and everything is going to allow the grazer to determine when the forage needs harvest either mechanically or by animals is not going to happen. It's the final decision is the grazer him or herself. So prescribed grazing is paid on the payment rate. It's not a cost share. If you remember earlier, it's not a grant. These conservation practices actually should pay for themselves. So that's one of the conservation practices. Here we have a prescribed grazing system with temporary fence. With all conservation practices, we try to, and we generally do a good job of using a least cost alternative. And in this instance, it's temporary fence, and we all know that a fence is just a psychological barrier. And with good grazing management, we try under humid or dry conditions to get forage into the livestock as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible so that they can lay down, ruminate, and make meat or milk or whatever. So here we just have an example of a grass field where we run the cattle through, and the livestock actually can destroy these type of paddocks, but because we're grazing high, the grass itself almost acts like a geotextile. So the art and science need to be considered here. Of course, here they've only been in for 6 hours. There's probably about 60 animals in here. They're in a small paddock, and there's a little bit of soil quality issue because it rained like 2 inches the day before this. Again, this is a practice would be called cover crop, and in outdoor access, some of the landscapes the soil may be degraded, or the soil is not covered with vegetation, and one way to do that is to put in a cover crop of millet or even sorghum sudan in some places, or oats. So that's a practice that you could consider. Animal trails and walkways are now considered heavy use areas, or there's a practice called heavy use area protection. And this is on a clay soil, and again, the least cost alternative, which helps out the bottom line for most everybody, including the taxpayer, is we try to locate practices so that they're not an expense, but they meet the intent of the practice. Here it's a clay soil, and you would think you'd want a laneway that was beefed up with geotextile and gravel, but no, it's put in the right place. And here's an animal trail and walkway where it just in front of us here it has ended. And we sometimes chase the practice because I'm hesitant here to say we don't estimate what the what the travel periods are going to be, what the weather is going to be, and so forth, because we don't live there. And that goes back to the communication thing, talking, being there, and getting out in the field. And as one of the good farmers named Brent up here told me, the best fertilizer on the farm are the farmer's footsteps. And that includes planters as well, I would imagine. Fence is another practice, and fence payment rates vary from state to state, and sometimes from year to year, because the payment rates are reviewed every year regionally nowadays. This fence is a high tensile fence. There's a buffer installed in here, which was planted recently. There was also going to be a stream crossing here, so that is another practice. Fence payment rates for high tensile in Vermont range, for 5-strand, range around $2 per foot. And they have to meet a standard. So when you're thinking about these practices, you can't go down to the local hardware store and say, I'd like this wire and that wire. You have to meet the conservation practice standard. And the conservationist will give you a conservation practice package, or a engineering practice in some cases for this livestock crossing anyway, and your contractor needs to follow those. Here's a livestock practice which many consider quite important, but again, we have to understand we're looking at a multifunctional landscape, and there may be a wildlife component of a grazing plan in here, and there would be an access control fence in the back for the wetland, which is a sensitive site, which we found in our resource inventories. And there may be an endangered species somewhere, which we need larger buffers. There may be an opportunity for shrubland bird habitat. So get specialists out there, partners, to help you inventory, and you can actually use access control fence. I'm not sure what some states do pay on an acre basis for access control, and you could fence out some brushy components in this grazing system, and then plan on removing some of the multiflora rows in this example, or some others, and move into even a frost seeding, which would come under the practice called forage and biomass planting. So everything is integrated in these systems to make it more efficient, and the final result is more forage into your animals. Okay, we mentioned forage and biomass planting. In the background you'll see the livestock, and we really like to see covered soil, and as was mentioned earlier, soil quality is a real concern. We used to be called the Soil Conservation Service, and here there's probably very little structure to this. So the forage and biomass planting with organic seed, most of the payment rates are higher because the organic seed and soil amendments come in at a higher rate, and they're figured that way. Before we go into this, I might mention that in the previous slide, the soil testing and nutrient management might be a component in there. And one of the goals may be to increase something like the arbuscular mycorrhiza, to put phosphorus back into the system rather than adding expensive organic phosphorus components. Now, conservation buffers may be somewhat underutilized in a lot of systems. They have innumerable, and some of them are listed here. They have a lot of value for your entire farm system. As a matter of fact, some of them can be edible landscape, and many of the of the partners might come in and think about permaculture in terms of putting these in. Of course, the buffers for drift of neighboring farms from pesticides or other contaminants might be important. In your grazing system on your organic livestock farm, you want fresh water, because without fresh water you're not going to get the milk production or even the meat production when there's lactating beef animals there. Now, in some of the organic pools, there are conservation practices that address manure management, but in general, the manure management practices are in the EQIP pools. So you may want to apply or talk to your soil conservationist and find out what is the best available route to meet the conservation planning objective. Now here, one might say, well, I want to compost, I want to bring in more carbon, and there's a possibility that they need to plan for a compost feedstocks area outside of this concrete area, and maybe make a composting facility right off the end of the barn. So the conservation planners are there to help you. Now, structural practices, there are quite a number of them, and they involve an engineering package in many cases, which I alluded to earlier, and they will require that you follow the standard and follow the operation and maintenance plan so that there's very little failure. Now, up in the right-hand corner on this picture, you'll see a culvert over what might be an access road, but you'll notice there's no stone header on that culvert, which could be very important. The contractor needs to read through your conservation plan and the specifications. This covered heavy use area, or it could be a composting bedded pack barn, is one thing that dairy livestock producers use in this neck of the world, and even some of the beef producers. I know some of the hog farms are using the Swedish straw method. That's something to talk to your soil conservationist about. Roof runoff, as mentioned here, is very important. Separating clean water from dirty water. I don't know what the Portland livestock structure is. Maybe we'll have that in the question-answer question. Vegetative practices. We can oftentimes ameliorate, or we can reduce the amount of runoff using plants. And if we can do that with filter strips, grassed waterways, plantings, and cover crop, that's where the best bang for your buck is going to be realized. And I won't say any more about that. So how do you implement these conservation practices? Throughout the previous talk, I've tried to incorporate this. Implementing them is going to be a series of talking, understanding what the requirements are, how they're going to be scheduled. There's a schedule of operations after a contract is signed. If you do not meet those dates for various reasons, or if it's a problem with just negligence, that is a communication problem. So we have to keep talking to our conservation planner on the schedules. Oh, pollinator hedgerows. Very good. The purpose and use, plant selection, these fit well into the multifunctional landscape approach. you might not want to plant these next to a highway like some of the median strips are, because those bumblebees will become hood ornaments. But anywho, that's fairly self-explanatory. Composting facility. Try to integrate all these facilities into a system that is efficient. Turning, water supply, temperature control, feedstocks, everything is included in that slide that you need to consider.
Thank you for catching that Portland livestock structure. I think that might have been a result of lack of sleep from having a young child. I meant to put in there portable livestock structure, which is a new practice that NRCS will be making available maybe not this year, but maybe next year. So might not be as relevant for dairies, but I certainly think there'll be a lot of interest in that. And I did just also want to mention in regards to pollinators and pollinator habitat, there is a new initiative that's focused, I shouldn't call it initiative, or I guess project, as part of EQIP that is focused on the upper Midwest states. There's 5 of them specifically that are going to have this pot of funds available to support implementation and installation of honeybee forage, because as most people are aware, the honeybees have been in major decline. So I know one of the practices is forage and biomass planting, and they're looking at organic pasture as a really great opportunity to include forage for honeybees. So if that is of interest to folks, I'd encourage you to check with your local office about that. In regards to financial assistance, I just wanted to make a few key points here that financial assistance, the payments are based on typical costs for implementation. So you're not going to get reimbursed for what exactly your costs were. NRCS develops typical regional costs and payments based on those. There are higher rates, up to 25% more for beginning farmer, limited resource producer, and socially disadvantaged producers as defined by USDA. So it's certainly worth asking about that. Also, most practices have multiple payment scenarios or rates. So if you're feeling like yours doesn't really reflect the costs on your operation, as Kevin mentioned, there's more often than not specific rates for organic operations to account for higher seed costs. So that's always a good question to ask. And then there's also some small farm payment rates. So in the past, people have been turned off from NRCS because the per acre rate has been so low that it might not be worth it. And so they've responded by developing some payments that are based on the farm, just per farm, to account for the time that it really takes to do things. So there are some sample costs here from Oregon a couple years back, and again, you'll just want to check with your local office to know exactly what's available for you. So some additional details. NRCS certifies installed practices before paying the producer. So they need to come out and make sure you've installed it correctly before they can pay you. So you have to have the money up front to do these practices, and that can be pretty tricky. The Farm Service Agency does have a loan program. And there's another great organization called the Shade Fund that's interested in working with organic producers, and they have short-term loans to assist producers with this issue. Program payments may be taxable, so you'll certainly want to check with your accountant or financial professional about that. You can sign up for multiple farm bill programs on the same farm. So I mentioned that EQIP is sometimes used on dairies because the projects tend to be larger, but you can also use the organic initiative at the same time. So if you for one reason or another have maxed out one program or have something that would be more or less competitive, you can look at different programs. And you can have more than one active EQIP contract at a time on the same farm. So again, you can think kind of strategically about timeline and cash flow and all those other variables. So other opportunities to get involved with NRCS, they have state technical committees and local working groups where producers and professionals can provide input on local resource concerns. So if something's going on in your area that you're especially concerned about, you can chime in. You can also ensure that local NRCS folks and state office folks are aware of the needs of organic producers. So if you're having a tough time with your local office, that's a great avenue to have your voice heard. And you can provide input on the ranking criteria and the practices and the costs. So if you don't feel that they're appropriate, you can chat with folks about that and hopefully get something changed. Hosting a tour is a really great way for NRCS to get out onto organic farms, and I facilitated a number of those across the country, and there's been quite a bit of interest, so I'd encourage you to consider that. Oftentimes NRCS will also hold listening sessions to interested producers to get feedback, similar to the meetings that I mentioned above. And additionally, NRCS has a conservation innovation grants, which I've seen used for all sorts of different things related to conservation. A recent one that I heard about was looking at alternative controls for a specific blueberry pest. But if you're interested in a project trying something new on your farm that other farmers might be interested in as well, it's certainly worth chatting with NRCS to see if there's funding available for that. So for more information, I wanted to point you to a couple resources. Oregon Tilth, my employer, we have a web page for my program, the Organic Conservation Program, that includes each NRCS state office has an organic contact in it. So again, if you're having a tough time with your local office or not knowing who to turn to, that's a great place to start. There's a fact sheet on the initiative. There's more information on being involved in the state technical committees or working groups, some resources on pollinators and biodiversity on organic farms, as well as a series of documents that we just published on nutrient management, buffers, and cover crops on organic farms. So also, we keep saying contact your local office. So the way that you do that, this is the main NRCS, the national web page. You can go over here and find your state office. And then this is an example of a state office homepage. There's usually an area down over on the left side that says Find a Service Center, and that's where you'll be able to find local offices. You could also just look in the phone book. They're usually listed in the front. So with that, I think we'll open it up for questions. And just to preface this portion, some folks often have the tendency to ask very specific questions about what you can do on your farm, and Kevin and I aren't able to answer those because we've never seen your farm and we don't know what your state-specific practices and costs are. So if you just keep that in mind, that would be very helpful. All right, thank you.
This question, the first one that's coming in, it says, I hope this question is not too specific. We have 30 acres in Vermont and struggle because we have a small stream that is not well defined, and thus it spreads all across one of our biggest fields, making it difficult to get the cows in the pasture, to get good forage to grow and spread any fertilizer. We would like to fix the stream by finding its source and channeling it to improve the fields. Is this something NRCS or EQIP might be able to support? And then they say I should also add that while our practices are organic, we are not certified. So do either of you care? Kevin, do you want to take that one on?
Yes. When you apply, you are going to need to fill out forms that you have not or do not intend, or you may intend to drain or manipulate a wetland. You need to talk to your field office and get involved with either the state of Vermont wetland or river corridor management people and see if this potential action is allowed or disallowed. Now, in some instances, that stream may have already been altered, and it could be a condition of maintenance. But my suggestion would be to see if you need to have a wetland determination, and if you could get people from the state involved, and if you get a conditional use determination from them, and then you meet all the requirements of wetland, you might be able to. But manipulating streams is very difficult. I would try to work with the system. Perhaps you plant a forage system that is resilient in times of flood and try to use what is there to your advantage the best you can. Unfortunately, some of these wet areas are cold and not productive, so it would have to be looked at. It is a very specific question, I know, but it would have to be examined and looked at, and a lot of work done on that one.
Great. So currently we don't have other, thank you, Kevin. Other people have questions. We don't have anything in the queue right now. Here we go. Thank you. Could Kevin explain a little more about what is included in a prescribed grazing plan?
Yes. A prescribed grazing plan requires that you do a forage animal balance sheet in order to justify the amount of infrastructure that you put in. You estimate the forage quantity and quality that is existing there. So some of the tools we use come from both New York and Vermont in this area, and we figure the productivity possibly based on some of the maps from the soil web survey. You can go out and actually clip some of these, or you can ask how much hay is taken off with the farmer, and then you size an area that the livestock will be able to consume. Say you have feed that is a 30% intake for organic farms that you're required to meet, and you don't have enough land, you may have to reduce your livestock. So the components of a grazing plan are about 8 or 9 requirements. The sensitive sites, the watering system needs to be planned, the fence system. I can't list them all off right now, but you need to do a forage animal balance sheet right off the bat and do a good resource inventory. Let's see. Please bear with me with being a little bit vague about this. But the bottom line might be said that you need to just see how much forage you're going to need over the years, do a forage animal balance, and protect the resources. So basically, that's what's in a grazing plan. And then there's a record-keeping component. There are issues with what supplemental feeds you're going to add. There's a nutrient management component to the grazing plan. If you want to go to our websites and see what these practices look like, you would go under technical tools, and those practices are the 528 is the number, and it's called prescribed grazing.
Great, thank you. So what resources does NRCS have available for farmers that want to have maps of their farms or fields? Can NRCS also define acreage on these fields? Is there a cost to having these maps? And are they available electronically or just in hard copy? So the mapping components.
Some of the statewide maps are pretty good. The Farm Service Agency can provide good maps, and yes, NRCS can provide maps. And I would definitely start out by going to the Web Soil Survey and getting soil maps and seeing what the productivity of that landscape might be. And the rest of the question?
Are they available to a farmer electronically or by hard copy? A farm map?
When we do a grazing plan, we, in terms of record keeping and making a map of where the paddocks might be and how we size the paddocks and where the locations are. In some instances, a large map is given to the producer, indicating where the pipelines are, and so this is part of the package that goes with the prescribed grazing package that is given to you. So the answer is you're going to get some maps, you're going to need maps, and there are various sources to get them from.
Mm-hmm. And whether you get them from Farm Service Agency or NRCS, those offices are usually co-housed, right? So
right.
It's just a one-stop shop.
Yes.
Is the cost share amount the same for every kind of fence, whether it's high tensile, woven wire, etc.?
No, it isn't. For instance, in some states, a two-strand polywire fence might be 40 cents a foot, and they're based on regional cost scenarios. So in this region, you'll be sort of on a level playing field in the regions. So with a 5-strand high tensile, or I think it might be a 3-strand, 5 or 5-strand, you're going to maybe get $2 per foot. If you want a 6-strand with a piece of buried barbed wire to deter predators, the producer is going to pay for that. So yeah, the fence costs vary.
Yeah, and every region has different types of fences that are, more popular, and so there'll be different scenarios and different costs to reflect that.
Great, thank you. So this question asks, can the maximum funding increase without passing the Farm Bill?
The money for this year has already been set aside, so it's not impacted by the current Farm Bill discussion. The next Farm Bill could change the $20,000, $80,000 limits if the language is changed, but it's in statute, it's in law, so it's not. We're not able to change it unless it's changed in the Farm Bill that's up for discussion right now.
And while we're talking about money, Sarah, this person asks, if farmers don't sign up for EQIP Organic Initiative, does that money then get moved into the regular EQIP or vice versa?
Yeah, that's what's been going on in the past. When the funding hasn't been utilized, it gets transferred back into regular EQIP. Yeah, so it's and I'm talking about tens of millions of dollars that have been going unused in the past. So it's really a huge opportunity for organic producers that hasn't been fully realized, and there are a number of variables contributing to that, but it's certainly worth looking into if you haven't yet.
Okay, great, thank you. So this question says, we have a small integrated farm, animals and crops. Does the paperwork increase with each item for each livestock type, each cover crop, and so on? Well,
Kevin can, I'm sure, chime in, but that's what we have on our farm as well, and I would say there's a base level of paperwork you have to do just to get in and eligible and, signed up. How extensive you want to get in how many practices you want to use and how complicated the practices are is completely up to you. So prescribed grazing is one of the more complicated practices you could sign up for, whereas cover cropping is relatively straightforward in regards to paperwork. So if to do a dozen practices to completely to work with all aspects of your farm, then it could be complicated.
And can I ask a follow-up question on that myself? If you have a sort of a package, but you want to roll it out, I'm assuming that the implementation is like a phased. Is that okay, or how would you recommend farmers kind of look at that? Like just go for the whole package and then you can phase the implementation?
That most planners encourage people to start slow and somewhat easy. So your contract can be over multiple years. You're locked into the payments available when you sign up. So in my case, for our farm, our NRCS planner discouraged us from doing too long of a contract, because 4 years from now, the payments with inflation or whatever, the payments for the practices might actually be higher. And so we actually only ended up doing a 3-year contract where we kind of strategically laid out what we were going to be doing each year as to not overburden ourselves and also to stay under the $20,000 limit. So I think most planners know what's reasonable to take on based on the reporting and the paperwork requirements, and so they'll probably try to work with you to do that. But I think more often than not, the $20,000 limit is probably the biggest variable for kind of figuring out your timeline.
I might add that when putting this step-by-step approach in, putting the practices in the right order is important. In other words, if you have a grazing plan and you have fence, water, and a pumping plant, a solar water pumping plant, you might want to make sure the livestock have water somehow. It might be that you do something on your own before you put in a pumping plant. And then, of course, the fence, and then later on maybe some brush management. So scheduling things is important, and the step-by-step, take it slow approach is very good advice.
Great. And then a comment came in that said they've used the soil survey, and though it takes a little to figure out, it has been useful information. So thank you for that feedback. Any other questions? I don't know if folks who use the soil survey, I found, I don't know if this is a helpful hint or not, but I found a smartphone app that will, I don't know if other folks have seen this app, but you can basically bring it out to the field, and it has a geolocation connected to it, and so you can just click a button and it will tell you all the soils beneath your feet. It's pretty nice.
And just a caution there, soil mappers, I used to map soils at one point, and a caution that a soil map line is not always correct, or just be aware that if you go out in the field, you might want to take a shovel, a soil auger, and examine it yourself, and not rely completely on a soil map. So get to know your soils. That's what we're trying to encourage. Dig a hole, smell it, look at if you have dung beetles, a number of other issues go into pasture quality.
And some people are asking for the name of that app, and I'm just looking it up right now. Yes, I think it's available through the California Soil Resource Lab, and it's called, sorry, bear with me, I just lost it here. Soil Web. So if you go onto I'm not trying to promote a certain product, but it's pretty cool. It's called Soil Web. So if you go into the iTunes store or the Apple store, just type in Soil Web. Any other questions? Just wait a few seconds. Great. All right. Just waiting for that last question that might come in. Otherwise, we will conclude. All right. Okay, well, I would like to thank all of you who, oh, one more, sorry. Okay, great. This person says, can you give a few examples of beginning farmers using EQIP? That's a really good question.
I'd be happy to chime in, and these aren't all necessarily related to dairy, but there's a number of different opportunities, especially along the lines of organic if you're just starting out. So the National Organic Program has rules about what organic production is and what practices you're required to do. So as a beginning organic farmer, you're probably going to be very interested in creating buffers on your property to prevent contamination from off-site use of pesticides. And so that can be accomplished. You can create buffers in a number of different ways. You could do actual hedgerows or windbreaks. If the risk is low, you can just kind of do a spatial buffer of about 30 feet or a road, but it's space that can be utilized for wildlife or pollinator habitat, which is something NRCS can definitely help with. So those are great practices to consider. A nutrient management plan is also helpful to kind of get a sense for where you're starting out on your soils and what they have and don't have and what materials you might consider using. There are a number of other common practices to build soil quality, so cover crops and mulches. If depending on what you're growing, there are practices that can support reduced tillage on your farm, which you might not want to consider until you're a little bit more experienced. So those are some of the first ones, but actually as a beginning farmer myself, on a new piece of land, there were some structural issues that we worked with our NRCS planners on, because there was a huge old barn that had no gutters and the water was pouring off and causing all sorts of erosion into the stream. So we were able to do roof runoff and put in gutters and a drainage system for the building. So there's things that you might not initially think of as conservation practices that NRCS can help with as well.
And for beginning farmers, is it that 90-10 cost share? It's a little bit more helpful. Is that the case in the organic initiative?
I believe so. Yes, that is the case. It's a higher payment. So you'll definitely want to identify yourself as a beginning farmer, and I believe you have to self-certify. If you're audited, you have to show some previous Schedule F, but yeah.
Okay, great. This person asks about where they could get more details on the 9 steps.
The planning process could probably be obtained off the national website page under the National Planning Procedures Handbooks. Your local NRCS office might be able to provide that information to you, and as well, the conservation practice information is on there too. For instance, a question about the prescribed grazing and animal dry matter requirements, the grazing intervals, and the rest period, and the best way to measure, and the paddock size. All those things that go into grazing planning can be on some of the local grazing websites. I might mention that ATRA has some good information on planning and ways to make a good farm plan, as well as riparian grazing or grazing to control parasites and so forth. So don't hesitate to go to those.
And this time of year as well, if I can just chime in, there's lots of conferences. This is sort of what I call the conference season right now. So, you know, typically NRCS or USDA folks will be at various farmer conferences. I know here in our state, you folks are at, you know, represented at all of our major conferences. So that's a great place also to learn about the programs and learn about some of these practices as well.
Yeah, right.
Well, thank you all for chiming in and typing in your questions. And I just wanted to mention once again that you can find a recording of today's session, recordings of our other webinars, as well as articles, videos, and more at eextension.org/organic_production. And thank you all for coming.